Hey everyone, it's Helen from SMB Dealings here. Today we have Dustin Fusillo with us, an entrepreneur who acquired a mechanical company about 15 months ago. Dustin had to sell the company, which we'll talk about in this interview, but he's now running a larger operation under Grant Victor, which is an ATM machine service and solutions provider. Looking forward to hearing Dustin's story. Dustin, it's great to have you on today.
Thanks so much, Helen. Excited to be here. Excited to share my story. I really just hope that your audience can learn from some of my mistakes and be able to share in the excitement as my career has progressed, but with the idea of looking through every adversity as an opportunity to learn and grow.
Absolutely. Well, Dustin, I guess to start, what's your background? What kind of led you down this acquisition entrepreneurship sort of space?
Sure. Well, let's start with kind of my professional early career and education. I started as a salesperson and had a lot of success. I learned a lot about people and how to communicate, read body language, and that was really helpful in a lot of different areas of life. But looking around at my colleagues, even as a young person, I realized that it really wasn't a career that I wanted to pursue long term. So I kind of started to focus more on the business side and understanding that. But I was drawn to politics. Early on, I volunteered in many campaigns. Many of the officials are still in office 15, 20
Wow.
years later. So I kind of learned a grassroots campaign effort and fundraising and all that. And it was really exciting. So I decided I wanted to pursue political science in undergrad. Really enjoyed that. The just debates in class and the professors and all the ideas. It was a really exciting time. I decided to go to grad school at Florida State University because it was in the capital, and I got a job at the governor's office in the capital, which paid for school. So I'm like, hey, this is the win. I'm working for the governor of Florida. I want to be in politics, and I get to free school. This is it. And within probably a month of being there, I was like, wow, this is not where I want to be. And I really tried to make it work. And obviously we just had the election recently, and I think politics have gotten even more divisive than they have back when I started in 2008 at the governor's office. And I tried to make it work. I went from working in the governor's office to a policy think tank, which was a fancy word for a lobbying organization, and learned a lot about policy and became kind of a nerd. And we did a lot of lobbying on the Hill. And really what I learned about that was a lot of lobbying is really just informing the elected officials of the issues, because they can't be an expert in every industry and every issue. So you're there to kind of educate them in a way that makes sense so they can make a decision. I enjoyed that, but there was just so much money influencing that it really was not the environment I wanted to be in, to give it the PC answer. Right around that time is where my dad was an interior designer, and he had this very high net worth client who was redoing this huge house. And I had expressed interest in changing careers. And he said, "You got to meet this guy. He's super wealthy. He just exited a software company, and you should just talk to him." So I was down for, I think, Thanksgiving, one of the holidays, and I meet this guy. And like most software entrepreneurs, he's a little strange, to be honest. He's kind of one of those guys who are super, super smart and just is kind of awkward to communicate with. And within like a half an hour, it kind of felt like a job interview. And it was really one of those things where I was like, okay, I need to shift gears a little bit and start talking about where I can provide value instead of kind of just seeking advice. And he expressed the interest in starting a private school. He wanted to start a private Christian school in Bradenton, Florida, where I grew up, because he was unhappy with education that he was getting from IMG Academy, which is a very, very elite sports academy in Bradenton. And he said, "Look, we're just beginning this thing. You'd be my third hire. Do you want to join the team?" And I was like, "Okay, I guess I could move back to my hometown." And I threw out a number that to me at the time was a big number, and he's like, "Done." So
Love it.
it went from me kind of just getting advice from this guy to him offering me a job. And then this is kind of where the story gets really weird. He hires two more people. He We didn't buy the building. I think we leased the building, leased to own the building. And then he goes, "Okay, guys, start a school," and left and went back to Colorado. So we had
That's
never met each other. the backgrounds were very diverse. Only two of the five of us had educational backgrounds, and we really had ambiguous titles. And he's like, "Okay, guys, just start the school." So I love that. I organizing chaos, kind of starting things from zero. I just thrived in that environment. But what it taught me was the importance of a team. And I know that everybody in business is like, it's the team, it's the employees, yada, yada. But that really, really solidified the idea, especially in a startup or an early on company, how important it is to have the right team from a cohesive perspective, but more importantly, from different skill sets. If a lot of us are thinking the same, you don't have that healthy debate. You don't have the different perspectives. That was one thing. And then the other thing was just the type of people that want to either give or they want to get. And we had some folks on the team that were all about their title and how much money they made and how important they felt. And it was like, look, we all have to do what we have to do to get this thing going. And it doesn't matter that you have a VP title and you don't want to help work on the bathrooms. It's like that's just going to be required. I know that you think you're important, but you're not that important. And we all have to have that attitude. And that really helped me understand the importance of hiring. So that's kind of the beginning of the career and the beginning of business. You want to take a break there, ask any questions, or you need to keep rolling?
Yeah, no, let's keep rolling. What happened next? Like how long were you, working or I guess building the school up? What kind of caused you to leave and ultimately, what happened next?
Sure. Well, I had every job at the school because I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none kind of guy. I like knowing a little bit about a lot of things. It's really helped me in my life. So I was able to work in a ton of different roles. I helped build the boarding program. So we rented an entire apartment building and I furnished that. And we started a transportation program between that building and the school. I started the cafeteria and the food service program. I mean, IT, I did all these things and I just loved it. It was like, okay, project, get the transportation going. And then the next project was get the locker room designed and finished and managing that team. And I loved every part of that journey. What kind of happened is as the school grew, we ended up having a staff of about 35 people. The school grew to a student body population of about 120. We started to kind of make money. It was difficult at first. The complexity of getting accredited in a school is extremely difficult. And one of my colleagues that was an early hire, she managed a big part of that process, and I supported her. And it was incredibly challenging. We got it done. But what ended up happening is I worked myself out of a job. I was the project manager, business development guy at the end, and we ended up having an admissions department that was pretty strong team, and they were doing a lot of P&L analysis, and they were like, okay, well, who's on here and who's contributing? And in the past, a lot of what I was contributing was not really going to the bottom line, and it made sense because we were in build mode. But once you have an established organization, I just kind of became an anchor on the P&L, and they were like, "Hey, you're one of the highest paid people here, and you're not really providing value to the bottom line." So they bounced me around a little bit, and ultimately, the last job I had was a personal assistant to the founders. So as I said, high net worth people, always traveling, multiple homes, multiple assets, and got exposed to that level, growing up very humbly in a two-bedroom, one-bath house with, working class parents. Being exposed to that world was really interesting, but it also taught me a lot about money and more importantly about people. And I remember one time we were in the car and he got a call on his phone and it was a friend of his son's mother, and she said, "Hey, just wanted to give you a quick call. We're trying to close on our house, and the old house hasn't sold, and we have to put down a deposit. So, can I borrow $70,000 from you for a few months?" And he's like, "Well, what do you mean?" And she's like, "Well, I just needed to borrow the money, and it's not a big deal." And he's like, "Well, I don't really have that kind of cash laying around, and like I need to look into it." And it was just, it was baffling to me that people would call him and just ask to borrow $70,000. They're not even tight. Like this is just like a buddy of one of his
That's
kids.
funny.
And but I was like, "Does that happen a lot?" And he goes, "All the time." And he said, my entire relationship with people is built around money. And he said, it's really unfortunate. I never know if somebody's there because they want a business investment or they want to borrow money or they want to extract something from me, or if they want to just truly be my friend. And I obviously became very close as a personal assistant. You are like in these people's lives. I mean, I became very close with their kids, and obviously his spouse and I are even closer because she's more of like the ground level person and he's the 30,000 foot guy. And it taught me obviously money is fun. It's a great tool to grow businesses and buy businesses and generate more wealth. But I saw the pitfalls too. I saw how it impacted his children, how they grew up with very little adversity, and how they had to kind of find their way, and they have since, which has been great. So it initially I was like, man, this is a great life. And then I realized how much responsibility comes with having wealth. And that really kind of shaped what I wanted in my life, which it kind of ties into your background about financial freedom. It became less about having a ton of zeros behind my number in the bank account and more about, well, what's the best thing that I could buy with the money? And that's where I shifted to kind of more of an understanding of what I needed to deploy money in a way that added value to my life and not created this kind of wall between me and the people around me like it did for my former employer. So I didn't want to lose friendships because they asked to borrow money and I said no, or I borrowed money to them and they never paid me back. That's what happened all the time. He would just give money and say, well, I won't get that back, but I don't want to lose the relationship over it. So
Wow.
what I learned, and you've done this in your life, is the best thing that you can do with money is buy back your time and then spend that time giving to others. And whether it's your family or your friends or your community, I feel like the best use of money is to just buy your time. And I had one guy who very, very successful exit, $750 million exit. and, and I asked this guy, I was like, what did you learn from your journey? And he said, well, I've gone through 3 marriages. My kids don't talk to me. My health is terrible. The doctor said that I will die in 5 years if I don't change my entire lifestyle. And I have a ton of money in the bank. He's like, so what was the point? He goes, I just became obsessed with work. He goes, I could have retired 25 years ago, but I became obsessed with work. And now I have to try and rebuild a life with people that matter in an environment that I've created. And it was really informative to my understanding of business. So let's kind of fast
That's
forward a little bit to, well, go ahead, ask a question if you have one, please.
no, that's super interesting. And I totally, I think I always optimize for time leverage. And I think it's underrated. Too many people sort of chase the dollars and ultimately you definitely hear these stories a lot. By the way, excuse me, I'm moving, but a lot of people definitely, I guess I've heard these stories of people, who've made a lot of money, but sacrifice their health, their family, and all these things. And ultimately, I
Yeah.
think, I don't know, to me, it's probably just not worth it. To each their own, of course, but I think that probably is the general consensus. But I'm curious for you, being around all these folks, how did that inform kind of what was next? Were you then sort of exploring options? In terms of like, did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur even? What kind of happened next?
Well, I did, and what's funny is my mom found this picture of me when I was a kid, and it was kind of like one of those dress up things where you dress up as what you want to be when you grow up, and mine was a business guy. So I've always wanted to be a businessman, but it's just one of those things where you can't really build the skills and get the street cred unless you get out there and do it, because you can't just apply for a CEO job if you don't have a CEO experience. But it's like, well, how do you get CEO experience? So I had to kind of learn that journey of working my way up in a way that made sense. And the startup was the beginning, but just before we move on, I did want to have an anecdote about money and time. Uh, One of my previous roles was an account manager at a large HVAC manufacturer, and I had 40 accounts, and I became very involved in a lot of these business owners, businesses and training and et cetera. And I had one guy that was very successful, And he was complaining that he had taken his boat out of storage, had it detailed, and didn't take it out the entire season and was putting it back in storage. And I said, okay, you made $1 million last year. You could have hired a GM at 200 or 250, still made 750, which is plenty of money for most people, and had to work maybe an hour a week. I said, so help me understand. Well, no one can do it as good as me. I said, okay, let's say that's true. Might be. What if he did it 90% as good as you? You just bought 100% of your time back for 90% as good of a job. You can be here to make sure that you're filling in the gaps of the 10, and you can take your boat out every day. And you can spend time with your kids and your mom who's sick. And it it just became like a control thing and an ego thing. And that was really informative to me. I do not want to ever be that guy who's like, no one can do it as good as me, or I have to control every aspect of the business to the point where I make myself crazy and I have no time. So I just wanted to add that little anecdote in there because
No, I
it was
mean
really really interesting.
it's very relatable. I think I told you in the pre-call, I think that was the biggest unlock for me too in my businesses. And, knowing that I wasn't sort of the go-to person or the one in charge of everything and sort of like the jack of all trades everywhere, really not only allowed me to have more time to myself, but also allowed us to grow our business a lot bigger, right? You're only one person, there are only so many hours in your day, and that's ultimately, truly, I think it's one of the biggest mistakes folks make with thinking about, running a business and starting a business or buying a business. But no, totally agreed there.
100% right. I mean, it's key person risk that a
It
lot of
is.
companies are unsellable because the owner or the founder has built the business around them. They hold all the relationships with all the customers, with all the vendors. They have all of the details around why it functions and what works. That's not what you want if you ever want to exit the company. I mean, you just own a job at that point. And I think you did a great job in your businesses of doing that because if you have an absentee business, everybody wants that, especially investors. They don't want to have to get out there and hire an entire management team because they have to replace the founder with 4 people. That kills the P&L, it kills the profit, and that knowledge transfer is difficult. So it is just so important to I in my business now, I mean, it's a much larger organization. So I have 4 managers that are professionals. They've been here for 10 years. They're really good at their job. And I just empowered them to do their job and run their departments, which has freed me up to do more of the things that I'm good at, which is strategy and growth. And my predecessor, amazing guy, he was more wired for the operations. So he liked being in the nitty gritty, getting his hands dirty every day, problem solving, but unfortunately, that doesn't allow the business to grow because it can only get so efficient. If you want to try and increase SOPs and squeak out margins here and there, that works for a while, but ultimately growth is the key beyond just efficiencies.
No,
So I know we're
totally.
jumping around a little bit, but
No, but let's fast forward to, I guess, maybe 2 years ago, or I know
sure.
you made an acquisition 15 months ago. What kind of led up to that? Is it something that was kind of top of mind for you? How did you sort of even learn about this as an option?
Well, the startup helped. So that gave me an understanding of you can use money to build something or buy something. And part of that, the founder would invest in other companies. So I was exposed to some small business investments and some private equity investments. So that was really, I kind of planted the seed. But in my mind, I'm like, I'm not 100 millionaire. I can't do this. I didn't realize that there was a niche for people who have small amounts of money and the opportunity, the ROI, if you have the skill and the desire and the risk tolerance, you can build wealth and you can build a meaningful amount of it with a very small initial investment. So that was kind of where I entered into a research mode. I started reading the books, the HBR book, How to Buy a Business, Walker Dybel's book. And then I became a business nerd, and I went from the political nerd and constantly following all the political crap, making myself crazy to I literally just turned off everything. When I left the governor's office, I was like, I'm done with this life. and I just turned it all off. And I tell you, my stress level went down considerably. Unfortunately, my brother, he works in the executive office of the president, and he's gone through 4 administrations, so he has to be part of it. But he's trying to just maintain his sanity while he serves the our people, our citizens. But I began to just really study it and then network within this community. I became friends, as I said before, with former entrepreneurs that had exited, current CEOs, current business owners, and just try to learn from them and understand what it took. And I eventually realized that I needed to save a little bit of money. So I began to flip houses. That was kind of something that I had done in the past that allowed me to generate some wealth. And I got my real estate license and started to buy very small condos that were, really dilapidated. They had hoarders in them, and I would fix them up and flip them. And I'd make 25 or 30 grand on that. And that was to save 30 grand in a year in a normal W-2 is really challenging. You got to cut like everything out of your life that's fun, or I could make that in 3 or 4 months flipping houses. So I was able to build enough cash to start looking for a business. And I learned that, based on 100,000 or 200,000, whatever you had in cash, you could buy X amount of business. Started to do the biz buy sell searching. It's kind of like a complete vacuum of time. You just go on there, and it's like kind of like social media for business nerds. You get on there and you're like, oh, that's interesting. This is they produce paper clips, and this person produced it, and you just find all these weird businesses. And it's funny. I'll talk to my friends that are not in business, and I'll be like, can you believe this guy has I found a septic cleaning and repair business. Guy was making 700 grand a year in EBITDA. He had 3 employees, and it's one of those nasty jobs that no one wants to do. But if your septic goes down, you're not going to be like, oh yeah, we'll fix it next year. Like, you are fixing it right then. So it's kind of like HVAC that I was in. People are not going to not have air or heat. They have to do it. And he was making crazy money with this small team. And I would send these deals to my friends and share them. I'm like, wow, this is so fascinating. So I knew I wanted to do it. And ultimately, I had a great W-2 job. So let's fast forward. I'm in a corporate role. I had gone from outside sales and HVAC and plumbing and electrical to a corporate role. I was recruited, really enjoyed that. That's where I had the business development opportunities with these 40 clients, and um, just had a real hard time scaling within a corporation. I was one of 800 people. And while I had exposure to the leadership, it's hard to get promoted. It's hard to grow. And I'm a guy who's like, I'm going to work twice as hard as everybody else. But if I do that, I want to make as twice as much as everybody else. And it, it wasn't really wired that way, and unfortunately, in the organization. So I realized pretty quickly I just had to get out. And ultimately, I made the decision to just go all in at the end of 2022. See, I'm getting my dates mixed up now. Let's
Went
see.
all in as you quit your job and you're like, I'm gonna full-time search, or did you
Not
already
not
find
quite there.
something?
Not quite there, because I wanted every dollar I had, I knew I could leverage up with an SBA. So I didn't want to quite live off of savings yet, but I worked remote in this role, and my boss was really cool. He's like, look, just if you do your job, I don't care, which I think that's how it should be. And I did a really good job, and I was hitting my goals, but I would spend 30 hours a week searching. And that was what led me to my first deal, which ultimately did not work out. I invested many months of diligence, flew from Florida to Colorado to visit the owner, uh, the tour of the facility, meet the staff, and a lot of that went well until it didn't. What really happened was I feel like, because I had told the seller that I was moving to Colorado, I was quitting my job, he thought this guy's all in. And he just started to kind of turn the knobs and the levers of the deal in his favor in the very last few weeks before closing. And the last part, the deal breaker for me ultimately was the triple net lease, but there was a lot of things like work in progress and inventory that, oh, we'll work it out, we'll make it fair, that just wasn't fair in the end. And then the triple net lease on this building that he had owned for 50 years, his dad had owned it and then he owned it, put no money into. That's what killed the deal. Because I'm like, what kind of guy wants me to take over a triple net lease with terms that, I mean, I got to replace everything in this building, and then we had a lease to own clause. So it's like I spent all this money in TI, and then I go to pay you a premium for the business or for the building later. It was just really a bad way of doing business. And I'm not going to say this guy's a bad guy, but it was not a way, in my mind, of showing his integrity. So I talked to my attorney about it, and she said, you need to walk. So I learned a lot about having tough conversations in person. That's huge because you can be an email warrior all day long. There's a lot of nuance to emails. You'll read an email based on your mood. If you're in a good mood, you'll read emails. Oh, okay, I get it. If you're in a bad mood, you're like, well, how dare they say that? And it's so important to have these tough conversations around work in progress, inventory, AR, all that stuff in person, eye to eye. And you can read that body language and you can really see if they're doing what's best for themselves or for you or for the business. That's how it really should be. It really should boil down to what's best for the employees, what's best for the customers, not about us. Because if we serve our employees and our customers, we'll be taken care of. So that's kind of where this got really squirrely, because I had moved to Denver from Florida. So this is the all-in moment in my life. So I spent a year, about 10 months searching, and then found this deal. We had a closing set for the end of December. I moved out there December 1, really excited. Didn't have a car because I had a corporate vehicle. So walked away from a corporate vehicle, corporate job, moved out there and had to walk from the deal. So now I'm in like absolute panic mode. And this is where this emotional resilience piece that I've talked about, with other podcasts comes in, because it's really, really important to have the ability to endure large amounts of stress and uncertainty and do so with grace, because you can panic and you can make dumb decisions. And that's where you want to try and reel back the emotion and default on logic. And it just becomes a habit, and just letting go of all the negative thoughts, because being in panic mode is not going to solve the problem. And that was what I went into. So that was where I started to focus on networking and refining the search to just Denver, and really a very tight geographic area. Thankfully, it had a lot of density, so it was a lot of options, and that's where it kind of leads into the last deal that I bought. So
I
ended
guess
up,
question on the first one.
sure,
You spent months on this deal. Were you looking at other deals, simultaneously? Were you like, I'm all in on this? Because I think a lot of people don't realize that, like, oftentimes, I mean, more often than not, the first deal you pursue is not going to work. Now, I think a lot of people end up wasting a ton of time being just so not just financially invested, but emotionally invested in this one deal. And then there's this
yes,
huge sunk cost, which, when you find something that's wrong, you want to be like, oh, but I can fix it. Oh, but I can, deal with it. Because I've spent 5 months on my life on this deal, right? And
yeah,
it's like, we've had to pass on deals like very, I guess, last minute in the scheme of things. And it's tough. It doesn't get easier. And it's like, I always tell people, like, you can't be emotionally attached, but I don't say
mm,
it like it's an easy thing. But no, completely agree there. And yeah, curious, I guess, how did you kind of navigate this? Did you have a strong pipeline the whole time? Were you just kind of like, I'm all in, I've already, obviously towards the end you moved, so you were actually all in, but during those
yeah.
couple months.
Well, I mean, objectivity is the key here. You cannot get emotionally invested, because the seller is emotionally invested for sure. So we can't have two emotional people negotiating on a deal. The seller is like, this is my baby. This is the most beautiful baby in the whole wide world, and I'm giving it to you. That's already difficult to overcome. So you can't be emotional as well. But as far as deal flow, yeah, I kept exploring deals up until we had a contract pretty much ready to go. I mean, we had gone through multiple drafts of contracts. This is way past the LOI phase. I mean, we are in deal making phase, and in my head, I'm already spending the money. I'm going, all right, well, I'm going to buy this piece of machinery, and I'm going to invest this in marketing. So like I'm going. And but to be honest, it was exciting because I'm going from a low six-figure salary to a seven-figure, EBITDA in a business. And even after debt service, this is quadruple my income. So I'm like, this is exciting, and it gives me a lot of opportunities to be diverse in how we grow this thing and taking care of the employees, et cetera. So yes, there was definitely an emotional component and excitement there. I tried to stay objective until the very end, but once it became real with a contract, that was kind of where I just stopped the pipeline. But
Yeah, that makes
the,
sense.
the previous deals, I was looking in kind of the 300 to 400 EBITDA range, and this was it was a 1.2, which ended up being a one after you added back a lot of the the well, you remove the add backs, I guess you could
Yeah.
say, from the seller, because there was all these just random stuff in there that he had used for many years. But this was the top end of my buy box. I mean, I was really leveraging every bit of SBA for the deal, as well as my down payment. But what I did learn in the process, and I think a lot of people in this space understand, is when you go small, there's certainly upside. The problem is you lack a lot of the personnel we talked about in the past, a lot of the processes and procedures, a lot of the historical financials and CRMs and things you need to mine data and understand trends. Those don't really exist in these small companies. So while a small business looks like a better deal, and that's what I ended up buying, was a much smaller business, it's typically much higher risk. So when I walked from this deal, a broker called me. I had been dealing with locally, and he said, "Hey, I got a turnaround for you. You've done startups in the past. You've done fix and flips and houses. This is a fix and flip. Let's get you in there. The industry is very mature, but you can buy low, turn it around, flip it in a couple of years." And in my head, I'm thinking, well, man, if I could buy this thing and flip it in 2 or 3 years, I don't need to make 10x. If I can make 2 or 3x, that's great return. I've learned a lot. I've run a business, and now I have the street cred to get out there and do a bigger one. The idea was I wanted to run a much larger company, but getting somebody to write you a check without having experience running a company is very difficult. I don't know how these 20 somethings fresh out of college get these huge checks, because the guys that I know that have that kind of money are like, I want to know that you can do this, and I'm not taking that kind of risk unless I know you have the experience to perform. So I ended up buying this business, and that's kind of where things went south. I did a light diligence because I had spent so much time and money in the previous deal, and it didn't, in my mind, necessitate a true quality of earnings because it was such a small deal. Obviously, I didn't have the SBA peeking in and looking under the hood, which would have probably found some of these things that I missed. But the biggest thing was not understanding the industry. Looking at a P&L is a skill. Reading between the lines of the P&L is an art. And that is something that I've learned over the past year. Is understanding financials is a skill that you can be taught, but the art of going, okay, well, why did payroll go up and then down, and why did this capex go up and down, and the trends, and understanding not just historicals, but what is behind the numbers, what people are behind the numbers from a customer standpoint, from a vendor standpoint, from an employee standpoint. So all these numbers tell a story, and if you don't have the skills to be able to ask the right questions, it really can be to your detriment. And that unfortunately is what happened to me. So I get in.
I guess
Bought.
before you even continue, when
Sure.
you decided to pursue this turnaround, how did you finance it? I'm guessing you did not go SBA since it was a turnaround.
Yeah.
So there was no like personal guarantee on this opportunity if it went, I guess, further south, if that's the right word. But yeah, what did that look like? How did you structure the deal? Given it was a turnaround, just I think more unusual compared to, a lot of the folks I interview who are buying more so that like established cash flowing business.
Right. And it had historical financials that show that it could, like, again, outside looking in, you could see it had great financials in the past, but they had gone down. I paid cash for the deal. And to me, again, it was less risk. I'm not leveraging $4 million from the SBA. I'm not personally guaranteeing this amount of cash. I'm not paying 8, 9, 10% interest on this cash. So in my mind, I'm like, it's a safer bet. But what I didn't understand was the industry dynamics, that the business and the industry had peaked during this period of prosperity. And then it just began to really, really mature, commoditize, and consolidate. And there was a reason why this company hadn't been acquired in the past. And that's where you got to ask yourself, especially on a turnaround, am I the luckiest person on the planet or am I the dumbest? Because why have so many other people passed on this business? Because he went to his competitors and were like, hey, you want to buy me? You want to buy me? And they all passed. That should have been a huge red flag for me. So a little bit of naivete and hubris involved in that decision. I don't regret it though. I mean, I lost a lot of money. I actually have $8,000 left to pay off all my debt. So I've got about 6,000 left in the checking account for this business, and hoping to pay it off by the end of the year. Because we do have one customer that we retained after we were acquired that was a carve out, and I was able to generate some revenue since the acquisition of the business in March and the merger with my current employer, and that's helped pay off the majority of the debt. And then we got to go back to adding to my savings to try and do this again in the next 3, 4, 5 years.
No, that's we'll dive into that more, but I guess, paying cash for the deal makes a lot of sense. I guess hindsight's always 2020, right? But, looking back, what could you have done, I guess, during diligence? Is it, actually, getting a proper QB done? Is it speaking to other owners in the industry? Like what would you have done to kind of uncover these things that you missed?
Excellent question. I'm going to pull up some notes here. I can give you a high level on it for sure, but what I tell other entrepreneurs now, because I've had people reach out on LinkedIn and have asked me, I'm looking at a deal, we're really close. What do you think? The number one thing is the integrity of the seller. Is this somebody that you believe in, that believes in you, that the customers believe in, that you can trust? Because if you feel like in the previous seller, there's a lot of things where he's like, oh yeah, we might be overcharging that customer, but don't say anything. And that should have been red flags for me. But on top of the seller's integrity, which is the number one thing, the second thing is going to be go down into the minutia of each transaction. So I had a person call me and she had a dumpster business and or looking to buy a dumpster business. And she goes, it's profitable and there's high margin and yada, yada. And what do you think? And I'm like, you need to understand every aspect of that dumpster service, from how often they're going out there, who's going out there, the travel time, the gas, what's in the dumpster. Is it hazardous waste? Is it furniture? Is it food? Um, the trucks, how old they are, how often they're serviced. So you need to be able to understand, if you're bringing in $500 for a dumpster pickup and the P&L is saying it's costing you 300 in COGS, your GM's 200. Obviously, you can do the math down from all of your expenses, but you need to understand what is impacting the COGS and the expenses. Expenses are typically fixed to not fluctuate too much, but the COGS in that kind of industry and in many can fluctuate. And I told her, I said, you need to look at several several transactions from a workflow perspective from start to finish. How are you going from 500 to whatever your net is? And what's happening in between? And more importantly, what could change? If you had to replace the hydraulic system for the truck, what does that cost? If you had somebody get hurt, what does that cost? If you had to replace the entire truck, if all these different variables, like you need to think about, in a worst case scenario, what could go wrong that's going to impact that gross margin, that net. And so I kind of walked through it with her and she's like, oh my God, that's so helpful. And that's what I didn't do. I looked at these transactions and some of them showed a 60+% margin. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. I mean, coming from HVAC where 40, 45 was phenomenal, I'm like, this is a dream. So I'm trying to understand how I can grow those high margin categories. We'll get rid of anything that's under 15%, hyper focus on that. turn this thing around. Well, that is not what happened because the business was so messy. They had so many bookkeepers come and go, so many GMs come and go because the owner was totally absentee for the last 5 years, that we had income getting booked into COGS and income. We had like these transactions were showing a fraction of the true COGS because of the way that he was categorizing it. So it didn't get caught by my accountant, but a quality of earnings, I mean, that can be $30,000 or $50,000. You're not going to spend that for a deal that's under $500,000. I mean, it's crazy to spend that kind of money. So if you're going to cut corners, you need to go into the minutia. I also should have taken, so we talked about going into the transactions and understanding every aspect of it, but then you need to go into the inventory and take 10% of that and go open market and be like, first of all, is this inventory even valuable? Which in my case, it was not. It was legacy inventory. And unfortunately, like technologies, it becomes totally worthless. It's not like, well, you could sell it for less money. It's like, no, we don't even use that anymore. It's junk. And that hurt because I'm thinking I'm buying a $500,000 worth of inventory. And I'm like, well, in a worst case scenario, gosh, I can sell it for 75% off in a fire sale and make back some money. Not the case, unfortunately. So understand your inventory. And the last thing is your pricing. Is the industry pricing comparable to your competitors? Are you up? Are you down? And unfortunately, we had some large corporate customers that had been locked into a contract. So we had recurring revenue, which is great. Everybody wants to see that. But they were way overcharging these corporations. And I went in and I'm like, I someone is going to figure this out eventually. I know you've been doing this for 10 years, but I don't feel good about overcharging them, knowing that this is double what the industry is paying for this type of repair or this type of part. So I went in and changed their pricing up, and that killed my revenue. But it was the right thing to do because I didn't want to get sued either. I mean, these corporations, somebody goes in, does an audit, and they go, well, we've been overpaying for this for 5 years. Now, you owe us $4 million, 5 years of overpayment. I didn't want to risk that. And I wanted to do the right thing in business. I've always been taught, and I've always had this experience that doing the right thing, it matters more than anything. And I can give you an example. So when we were really in the darkest days, I mean, we were the end of October. I had owned it since March of that year, and the whole time we're trying to fix the books. We're trying to figure out how to make money. We're cutting staff because we had staff that was not doing the work, and we're just trying to keep this thing afloat. We find out again we're overcharging another key customer, and it was like about $10,000 that he had already paid us. And this guy owns like 40 companies. I mean, I know him personally. He's a super successful guy. $10,000 is nothing to this guy. And my accountant comes to me and she's like, what do you want to do? And I was like, the right thing. So I emailed him and I said, look, you've overpaid me for this to the tune of $10,000. I don't have the $10,000 to give to you. Can I pay you back a few $1,000s a month over the next couple thousand via credit? We had recurring business with him, but I still needed the money, coming in. I can't just, give him a whole credit for the next month's work. So we agreed to a couple $1,000s off each month of his bill as a credit, and eventually paid him off right before we sold in March of 24 of this year. And that I think that act of honesty, I think it really helped me sleep at night, but more importantly, it built trust with a serial entrepreneur who I have now become very close with. And in the very end, in February, I had him on a 60-day term. I called him up and I said, "Hey man, I can't make payroll." I was like, "You owe me $26,000. Is there anything you can do?" And he's like, "I'll pay you today. It's no problem." So, totally forfeited the terms of the deal because he knew I was struggling and he knew what it was like to not make payroll. Wasn't paying myself, wasn't paying my bookkeeper, but I had to pay my people. He just paid the bill right then. So again, doing the right thing in business is good business.
100%. I mean, that's not easy what you did. I mean, I don't know how many people in your position have been like, I'm just going to return you money.
Right. Well, they would have said like, hey, I'm going out of business. I'm losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is your problem.
Yeah, no. And look, you already went into this knowing it was a turnaround situation. What did first 30, 60, 90 days look like? And, was it even like what was sort of more, I guess, unexpected? Given I'm sure you had a degree of like, I know there's going to be things that I need to
Sure.
fix.
Well, it just goes against all the conventional wisdom. When you buy a business, they say don't change anything for 6 months and just listen and learn. And that's not the case in a turnaround. I mean, you are just bleeding money everywhere. So you have to make decisions on the fly and you have to be able to trust your books. And so I'm making decisions based on financials that are coming in each month that are totally wrong. And it took me about a month to realize this. So the first month I didn't really do a whole lot of changing, but I just plugged some gaps here and let go of some guys that were just not good employees. And I called the seller, and I was in a room. I had my intern there, I had my bookkeeper there, I had my sales manager there, and I called him and I said, "Hey, I'm trying to get to the 60% margin on this transaction. It was probably the third highest volume on the P&L. Help me understand. When we get this thing in, we fix it. So it was called an advanced exchange. And if you had a broken part, instead of you sending me the part, me fixing it and sending it back to you, which takes a week or two, you would call me and say, hey, I have a broken part. I send you a refurbished part right away. And then you send me the broken part back. I then refurbish that and put it back in stock. The problem with that is you have to pay for the return shipping. You have to pay for the repair of the part and then put it back in inventory. And all he was doing was the beginning of that transaction. So he was taking the money for the transaction, sending the part out, and then when the part came in, he wasn't adding cogs to bring the part back and repair the part to the first transaction. The cogs are just kind of buried in the P&L somewhere. So it looks like, wow, you're making 60% margin on this thing because the only thing it was adding to this was the shipping cost. So I'm just like, well, help me understand. He's like, well, I tried really hard to figure that out. And ultimately we couldn't find a cycle that worked because every time, one comes in, we repair it, it just goes right back out. So like the transaction never really ends. And I'm like, no, it ends when it gets back and we fix it. That's when it ends. And you need to apply the cogs of getting it back and fixing it to that transaction. And he was like, yeah, well, I couldn't figure that out. So I just did it in my head. And
Wow.
I'm looking around this conference table and everyone's like, what in his head? How do you do that? He's like, well, it's just real complicated. So, the way I ran the business was if I had money, if I made gross margin at the end of the month and in the department, it was a win. I didn't really dive too much in the details. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So that was where I totally went deep dive into the department and looked at again what I should have done from the beginning and the advice I give, looked at every transaction. How much are we actually making? How much time is going into this repair? And I found out that we were losing 20 to 25% on every repair we were doing on certain repairs. Everyone, because we were undercharging and we had way too much labor involved. And I'm like, this is all this stuff I should have found in the beginning and asked questions about, does this make sense? Do we increase price? Will the market bear that? Or do we stop doing it? And this is where I think if you're going to be buying a business, understanding how to read a P&L is important, but reaching out to folks that are in the business or adjacent to the business and asking the question, how do you read this? Does it make sense? I mean, I could have made one phone call to my current employer and they would have told me freely, hey, do you make 70% or 60% margin on an advanced exchange? And they would have laughed. They'd have been like, of course not. That's ridiculous. We would never make that. And of course, when I got bought out, I told this story to the board, and they were laughing, and they were like, "Man, we could have told you that." I was like, "Great. Well, now I know."
Hindsight 2020 though. I guess tell me more about the industry. You mentioned that it was peaking, you had no idea it was on the decline. Tell us, yeah, just more about that and how you learned
Sure.
that, and tell us just more about the industry as a whole.
The industry is unique. It's the cash industry, so it's the ATM cash dispensing industry, and it's really broken up in two different divisions. You have the financial institution division, so very big, expensive ATMs, and then the retail division. And that's what I was in the previous company, and that's the company that I run now. So retail that you'd see in a convenience store, gas stations, etc. The industry obviously grew as cash usage grew. And then when credit cards came out, it started to decline. And then you have things like Venmo and PayPal now, electronic exchange, that further stress the market. When dispensaries came out, that was a huge boom for the industry because they were all cash based. So massive deployment of ATMs and cash in all of these dispensaries. Well, that's kind of on the decline now too. So what's happening is the industry is still strong. It's just consolidating because you could be a small business like the one that I bought 10 years ago and make a ton of money because it was constantly growing. Whereas now it's more of a mature business and it's really just maintaining with some very, very small growth projections, which is just causing that internal consolidation. But the company I
Interesting.
work in now is a huge player. I mean, it's the biggest player in both FI, financial institution, and retail. And there's four organizations under the umbrella. So we have two, one on the retail, excuse me, one on the direct to consumer customer side, and then one that's a channel partner business and the FI channel, and the retail, same thing. We have a direct to consumer, and then we have a channel partnership. So it's a really interesting portfolio of companies that allows us to play on both sides of the street, leverage buying power with the OEMs. So the OEMs make machines for both the banks and the retail. So we can leverage the buying power to give us economies of scale.
Interesting. And with the business you acquired, did they have routes? Like, how did that work?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean
Like,
there.
were they servicing? Like, what specific function was?
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, sorry. So the one that I acquired that was eventually acquired
Yeah.
was just a repair business. So we were not we were selling machines, but we didn't have the scale to sell machines and make money, which is difficult to do unless you're selling thousands of machines. So it was really primarily a repair business. So we would sell parts, small parts, the internal components of an ATM, and then repair those components. So that was really the business.
So basically, with less usage, less obviously ATMs, fewer ATMs breaking. Is that basically what was happening?
Exactly. Yeah. And there's just not people that are entering in the market. So you're not getting new businesses popping up all over the place that need to buy ATMs. It's just guys that have been in it for 20 years who are expanding their portfolios or consolidating smaller portfolios. So it's just you're getting more and more bigger players.
And the folks that are expanding, do they generally have their own internal sort of repair teams, or is it just that it's hard to kind of take their business because they already have someone they're working with?
Great question. That's a great observation. Another thing that I didn't read in the P&L. So I'm looking at customers on the business that I bought that were spending two, $300,000 a year with us, and he's going, well, I lost them because I wasn't really nurturing that business, and you just need to call them or take them out to dinner and do your sales thing with them, and you can bring them back. Well, the truth was they had gotten so big that it justified an internal repair division because they're going, man, we're spending all this money and this time to send parts across the country. Let's hire three or four guys and do it internally. That's what happened. So a lot of these customers that I'm looking at going, man, if I can get back half that business, that'd be great. Zero opportunity to get that business back. So that's another kind of pitfall of the industry is as it consolidates, there's going to be situations where they go, man, it makes sense to just do that in-house. Not all want that. I have guys that are definitely at scale that have five, six, 10,000 machines that are like, I don't want that headache because it is a headache for sure. I mean, it's very, very detailed. It's very niche. A lot of historical information is needed to be able to fix these things because they're legacy. Some of them are still running it for 20 years.
Wow.
So you can't find repair guides on a 20-year-old ATM. You need to have a guy that just knows how to fix them. Those are hard to find. So there's still opportunities there. It's just, it's challenging.
Yeah,
time.
no, and as a kind of aside, what you said, the seller's response was, that he wasn't nurturing the relationship. I feel like during diligence, it's so important to take everything with, I don't know if it's like a massive grain of salt, but really just not take the seller's answer for like believing everything. Obviously the integrity is important, but they're also marketing their business and they want you to
Exactly.
buy it. So it's kind of like you hear a lot of like the reason for sale where someone's like, oh, I just I want to move on to my next
Yeah.
venture, or like something along
Yeah.
those lines.
New opportunities. That's the worst answer.
Yeah. And they think it's like this great thing and you're like, but why? And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
actually this business is
Who,
like not doing well and it's
of
horrible to
course,
run.
who would walk away from a business generating 500 $1 million a year absentee? Nobody would do that. Nobody would sell that unless they had some crazy opportunity. Just cash flowing $1 million a year, not having to work, you would keep that forever.
Yeah.
Florida is a great example of this. So I was in Florida for a long time in home services, and there was this loophole in the law around insurance and roofing where the roofers were getting called out by insurance companies to assess the roof. And if it had a certain, I may get the details of this wrong, but the general story is accurate. If a certain portion of the roof was not repairable, they had to replace the entire roof. Well, that's a counter incentive for roofers to go out there and just do a small patch job versus an entire replacement. So roofing companies exploded for like 3 years because they were going out and condemning every roof they went to. Oh, yep, it's a bird hit the roof. Oh, gotta get a new roof. And these are $30,000 to $50,000 projects. So these companies exploded, and I had tons of friends that were in roofing that were making crazy money, all insurance jobs, paid in full, nuts. Well, the legislature got lobbied by the insurance companies. Hey, this is broken. Like, we are getting screwed by these roofers, and it's difficult to get somebody that has the knowledge to be able to give you a fair assessment of the roof. So they closed the loop, and then all of a sudden, all these roofing companies are for sale on Biz Buy Sell. And if you look at these, you're looking at financials going, oh my gosh, 30% growth, 40%, 50%. It's just going like this. And you're thinking, man, if I can make him that hockey stick, I can make a fortune. Well, what you don't know is that all those jobs they did are gone because they're going to turn into repair jobs instead of replacements. That's just one example of understanding the industry and the dynamics.
100%. And those ones are sort of tougher to know. There's also more obvious ones, like, when you were seeing right after COVID, a bunch of labs for sale, right? And they're doing
Yeah,
so well,
exactly.
crazy growth. Talk with them, it's like, oh, it was all COVID labs.
Right.
But it's really funny. Not if you just like didn't ask any questions and just assume that this is going to continue, then you're screwed. But I guess back to your story, with the business, I think you decided ultimately you had to sell it, but kind of what led you to that decision, and at what point were you like, I can't turn this around, I need to pursue other options?
Yeah, great question. It really was. We did an industry event, so October was that make it or break it. We went to an industry event, and I had spent a lot of time researching prices and service offerings. I rebranded everything. I spent our last $5,000 to go to this industry conference in Vegas, and I told the guy I was with, my operations manager, I'm like, if we don't get business, if we don't generate the guys that we used to service and new business, we're done. Well, unfortunately, a lot of my competitors were good at what they were doing, including the company I work for now. And they were good people. So I'm meeting them, and they're offering the same service that I was offering at about the same price, at about the same quality. And it just didn't make sense for them to switch back. I mean, they had switched because there was a period of time at my former company that maybe had poor service or maybe had bad repairs, and they switched. And it is not enough incentive for them to go back. So we were not able to claw back any of that business or generate new business. And I'm looking at the books going, I'm just bleeding money. It was like $10,000 a month I'm bleeding. And I don't want to have to file for bankruptcy. I mean, I had enough cash and reserves for emergencies to cover it, but the lease was up at the end of March. That was $25,000 a month that I was able to avoid that, dodging that bullet. Funny story, I was actually looking at signing a lease in the summer before things got really bad. And a couple of landlords were like, we can't rent you. Your financials, they're not strong enough. And I'm so glad for that because I pushed so hard. I'm like, I'll personally guarantee it. Like I'll do whatever it takes. I'll put more down on deposit. And I mean, regardless of what I offer, they were like, no. So they were able to see this wasn't a healthy business. And thank God I didn't sign a 5-year lease. I would have been ruined financially. I mean, this hurt really bad. I lost a lot, but I'm not ruined. It was painful, but I had enough to kind of scrape my life back together and try and start over. Whereas the opposite would have been total bankruptcy. And that's just not how I'm wired. I mean, as I said, I have 8,000 left to pay off. I paid off my credit line to the bank. I paid off all the vendors. I paid off everybody except for Dell. I owe Dell 8 grand because I bought new computers and I financed them. So that was a mistake, unfortunately.
I mean, it seems like you're doing the right thing and still living by,
Trying.
the integrity sort of that's important. No, I mean, look at and what happened after, like, how did you even think of like, let me go try to, I guess, get acquired, or it's almost like an acqui-hire in some ways.
Yes, it
How did
is.
you kind of navigate that?
Great question. So I eventually I just came down to two exits. It was a volume inventory exit. So we had a plan to put the inventory on pallets in a very specific way where we felt like customers would want to buy it. It was kind of like a little gift box on a pallet with all the different parts that they would need for their deployments, their portfolio. That was option A. But would have taken a lot. I would have had to find a place to store it. I would have had to have moved it by pallet, would have been a huge pain. And option B was to sell. And obviously, these companies hadn't bought the business in the past. So I'm like, why would they buy it now? But I made one phone call. I called NextATM, which is one of the companies under Grant Victor. A guy named Cooper was running it at the time, and yeah, I had a lot of respect for him. I had met him at the conference. My last ditch effort at the conference. He was very collegial and very supportive and understood where I was at. And ultimately, he set up a call with the CEO of Grant Victor and the board. And what I thought was an acquisition call turned into an interview pretty quickly. What I didn't know is that Cooper was trying to leave the business to run one of the other companies for personal reasons. He wanted to have a little bit less demanding role, a little more flexibility personally. And I had no idea that I was interviewing for the business that was acquiring me. Because they kept asking, like, would you want to run a P&L and would you want to do this? And I'm like, well, yeah, of course. I run a business now. I'd love to run a business again. And they were like, okay. And then it ended up offering me his job and a great offer and paid to relocate me to Utah. I didn't have a partner at the time, which was great. And I was able to get out of my lease. They bought me out of my lease and I moved here right away. They're like, we want you to start within 2 weeks. So
Wow.
I went from like losing everything, fire selling all this stuff, trying to figure out the logistics to we'll buy all the inventory, we'll send a semi truck to pick it up, and we want you out here right away to start learning. And I'm like, this is this is the dream. I mean, this is a great opportunity. And now I'm running a company that's way, I mean, it's 20 plus times the size of what I was running before. And as I said, I've got a leadership team that's great. I have a board of directors that are great, that I've learned from. The CEO is a super smart guy. Watching him in meetings and watching him navigate is a really awesome learning experience for me. So I feel fortunate to be where I'm at and tried to have the right attitude during the whole process because being a nasty person or angry or trying to screw everybody else because I got screwed didn't help. And I think having that attitude opened this door because I would have been not susceptible to any kind of positivity because if I was just living in a dark place. So it ended up working out, and now I had the opportunity to grow within a much larger organization and maybe even be part of the C-suite one day.
That's I guess that's just an incredible story. And obviously, they're buying the company really because they believed in you and they wanted to really
Yeah.
have you on board. So I mean that speaks volumes.
It means a lot. I mean, it did, and it became pretty apparent because we're having a hard time justifying the purchase of the inventory now that I run the P&L. I'm like, all right, well, how much of this stuff is junk and how much can we actually make money on? So it really was an aqua hire, and I appreciate them doing it. And I've worked really hard to create value for the business, and I have. I mean, I've added the bottom line, and I want to continue to do that to thank them and grow this thing.
Dustin, I know we've gone way over, so thank you for your time. But I guess final question, do you see yourself ever going back into acquisitions? Maybe not turnarounds, maybe just, maybe the original
Yeah.
idea of buying that, maybe that $1 million EBITDA business. But yeah, what is this sort of, how does this sort of change your opinion on becoming your own boss?
Still have that dream. I do. But I would like to buy a much larger company for the reasons I explained earlier about having the right team and having the processes and having all the infrastructure to do what I'm good at. I've been kind of targeting understanding the CRO role. I had not been familiar with that in the past. That's a really fascinating role. One of my colleagues at one of our OEMs has that title, and I had to look it up. I was like, "What's a CRO?" And I was like, "Oh my God, that's like my dream job." Like a CEO is great, but in a big business is a lot of politicking. If you're publicly traded, it's a complete nightmare dealing with quarterly earnings and investors. I don't want that. I want to be the guy that's at the C level driving growth that can remove all the red tape, that can be entrepreneurial. That's my dream job. So if I can do that here, that'd be great. If I can do it in another organization, I'm open to that as well. But the dream would be to build the skills that I need to be effective at a larger level. I mean, in that $5 to $10 million EBITDA range, really where I'd like to be. And I know that I'm not going to get somebody write me a check that big until I have the experience to back it up and the results to back it up. So that's kind of where I'm at now, is building that repertoire of experience and change, and being able to present that in the future to the right person.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Any sort of final words of wisdom for, folks listening to this who are maybe going down this journey the first time, where you were maybe 2 years ago?
Absolutely. I think you have to begin with yourself and understanding the emotional toll this is going to take on you and your family. I think is the most important thing, and really getting to a point where you are okay with uncertainty and risk, because this is risky regardless of what you think you're looking at. A 30-year business always showing profit, that could turn around in a second. I mean, COVID's an example of that. I mean, a lot of businesses had great fundamentals and COVID happened. There could be another COVID, there could be another unforeseeable, and you need to have the emotional capacity to deal with overwhelming amounts of stress in a positive way. That's number one. And then we'll re-illustrate what we talked about before. Number two, the seller's integrity. Do you trust this person with your kids? Could they be a babysitter for your kids? You trust them alone with your spouse? Like this is the kind of level of trust you need to have with this person. Spend time with them personally. Go golfing, go play tennis, go do something physical where they're challenged to see how they behave, and observe closely. Have your spouse meet them, or your business partner meet them at dinner and get their vibe. And the last thing is just understanding the nuance of the industry. That's so key. Call people. I mean, I called people in the first deal that I had, the metal fab shop, that were competitors, and I said, "Hey, I'm looking to buy this company. What do you think?" And they were honest. I mean, they gave me their time and their experience for free. And I think a lot of business people will do that because they know where you're at and they can empathize. So those are kind of the three takeaways: that emotional piece, the integrity of the seller, and then understanding the financials and the nuance and the story behind the number.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Dustin, thank you again for going over with me. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah,
Really
thanks,
eager to
Don.
hear how this is going to progress. Follow it. I'm going to be following your journey, so hope to stay in touch.
Thanks so much. Take care.